So here we are, week 4 of the whitetail season. It is the end of October, and here in southern Ohio, we have this beautiful, cold, and rainy day. On the back end of this, I'm anticipating there to be some phenomenal hunting. I got out yesterday, I checked my trail cameras, and it was absolutely loaded. One of the newer areas that I'm targeting this year, I went and pulled those SD cards, and on one of the scrapes in the bottom, it was just absolutely torn up. There's 4 different very large bucks that have visited this scrape within the last week. A lot of that activity happening in daylight, and on top of those big bucks, there was other bucks visiting the scrape as well. There's does, and as I scouted that bottom, I continued to find a ton of signs. So this brings me up to something very interesting. I know that myself personally, I really don't like hunting bottoms that much. I feel that you don't have a lot of consistent wind pull, your scent kind of goes all over the place, and it can be very difficult to key in on high odds locations for these deer. But I'm running into this situation where all of the sign that I'm finding is closer to the bottoms, and there's not a lot of activity up on the tops. When I pulled that camera yesterday over that scrape, my buddy went up on the other side of the road and he pulled some cards that I had that were up on top of the ridge. There wasn't much going on. I also pulled another camera that was up on top, and it had very little movement compared to the bottom. So what we did last night on our first hunt in, we ended up actually looping around the bottom where I had that camera, where it was all torn up with sign, because the wind was absolutely terrible. The wind was blowing right up the bottom. So if we would have accessed from the access point and walked into that bottom where all that sign was, wind would have been dumping right over our backs into the actual bottom, and I would imagine that we would have blown a lot of the deer out. So what we did, we took the long way around, we came in from the back side of this system up on the top, and then we dropped in from it would be the southwest side, because we have wind coming out of the northeast yesterday. We did that, we got down towards the bottom, and we hunted one of the very tight little sections of it where there was a nice little funnel in front of it. Didn't see a lot of activity, but honestly, it was just one of those spots that felt right the entire night. Did find a beautiful hub scrape down there. Honestly, one of the biggest ones that I've ever seen. So this whole bottom has now loaded up with a lot of sign, and it's really got me kind of shifting my focus to, okay, how can I hunt this bottom even though it's not something that typically I like to set up on. So the way that I'm looking at it is that I have a couple of different options. I can just suck it up, I can get down in those bottoms, and I can just really try to focus in on the locations that I feel that I will keep that scent advantage, and use things like down trees, debris, scrape lines, whatever it may be that's gonna keep that deer movement away from where I believe that my scent is going to travel. You know, I think that when the bottoms get tighter, or you can use the terrain or blowdowns or things like that to have your scent blowing in a place where the deer aren't going to walk simply because it just doesn't make a lot of sense, that's when you can get away with hunting the bottom. So that's definitely one of the approaches that I'm going to look to take here over the next few days as that sign continues to stay hot down in the bottoms. Now, the other option of what you can do here, and this was something that when we were looking at the map yesterday for a secondary spot outside of actually hunting the bottom, was where are those terrain features outside of the bottom that you might be able to target to give you that high odds opportunity. So for an example, like what I was talking about last night, just outside of this bottom, about 80 to 100 feet up in elevation, there's this subtle little bench that you couldn't even see when you're just looking at the regular topo map, but when we turned on the LiDAR, we've seen this subtle little bench appear, and that opportunity right there could be a spot where you can set up and get a little bit more consistent wind pull, but still catch a lot of that movement on the bottom. You know, you're not hunting down in the bottom where you're potentially dealing with these swirly winds. You're up out of it just a little bit, and you're set up on that bench, so you're catching that traffic. If that bench ends up being one of the main up and down routes for those deer coming out of the bottom, then you still have just about that same opportunity as hunting all of that fresh, all of that hot sign down in the bottom. And that brings me to the front end of another point that I would like to make here, and I think it's the importance of hunting the hot sign this time of the year. So myself, as I mentioned, I don't really like to hunt the bottoms. I like to hunt the upper parts of the ridge system. I base a lot of my scouting, a lot of my cameras, a lot of that is around the tops just because that's where I enjoy hunting. Now, this year, I'm not finding that same sign that I'm usually finding up on the tops, it's down in the bottom. So I have to adjust my strategy if I want to stay in the deer. And this is especially important if you're out hunting on public land. And this is a very common time of the year, obviously, where people are making a lot of out-of-state public land hunting trips. So you have to get out there, you have to find the fresh sign and you have to adapt, even if it's not option A. You can go option B, C, D, this list goes on. You have to just keep going until you find something that has fresh deer sign, but also is favorable for you as a hunter to set up and hunt that effectively. And now the last thing that I really want to talk about just on like the current state of the deer movement is where we want to focus this time of the year. If you are getting ready to dive into a new area, or you're back into an area that you've been hunting and you've been really learning what the deer are doing, I think that we're entering the time now where you want to be around the does. If you find the does, you are going to find the bucks. So just make sure you're in a place that has a high volume of deer, and then you can begin to reverse engineer your setups so that way you can stay where you believe the bucks are going to be. So my easy approach of what I'm doing when I'm going out into the woods and trying to find a high odds location right now, start out by finding the does, learning about what they're doing, and then ask yourself why. Why are the does hanging out here? Are they feeding? Are they bedding? And where is the one that they're not doing located at? So another way to say that, if I know where they're feeding at, let's go find out where they're bedding at, or vice versa. And then you have this really good idea on the movement pattern of where the does are hanging out. And then you begin to understand that these bucks want to check on this doe group, but also other doe groups on the property that you're hunting. So what is the most efficient way that they can go from this doe group that we just found to another doe group that we can hopefully find based on things like the wind direction, the terrain, and then just the overall hunting pressure. Those are all going to be influences on how bucks bounce from one doe group to the next. But the key here is find the does. If you find the does, the bucks are not going to be far behind, and that is where your opportunity is going to lie within this next week. Now, just a quick little update on the brand. First off, we just wrapped up our Rutcation giveaway, so I'm getting ready to do that drawing here at the end of the month. We are now up to 30 members in the Next Level Whitetail School community. Thank you to all of you who have been there with me from the beginning. Thank you to our new joiners. I hope that we can continue to have that traction, that momentum building, and we can really turn that community into what I think that it has the opportunity to be. Speaking of the community, I have a new course coming out this week that is going to be targeted around buck funnel. So I just talked about the current state of the deer activity, where these deer are hanging out, where they're spending the time, how the bucks are interacting with the does. So I'm going to take a deep dive into 4 different buck funnels to help you guys as you're getting out there for your current rut trips. On top of what I'm doing in the community, I also have some new fresh stuff coming out on the YouTube channel. I'm going to keep going with my weekly vlog series here, but what I'm going to do this week for a little bit of a special for you guys is put together a mini series that is going to be focused on rut hunting in hill country, looking at the terrain. So my first video in that little mini series is just going to be an introduction. Overall, how are the bucks using the terrain to navigate through hill country during the rut? And then following that video, I'm going to break down a stand location at each of the 5 individual terrain features that I covered in one of my best performing YouTube videos. The video, Master These 5 Terrain Features to Become a Better Hill Country Hunter. So we'll break down a stand location at the saddle, the point, the bench, the thermal hub, and the drainage top. All 5 of those are going to be covered, whether we're hunting over the terrain feature directly or how I use the terrain features to find high odds setups in hill country during the rut. Outside of that, as always, you can find the daily educational content over on my Instagram page that will keep rolling out. That way you guys have those quick hitting tactics as we transition into November. Hard to believe that November is almost here. We're going to keep on rolling through this hunting season. We're going to take advantage of this good weather, some time off to dedicate out into the woods to chase down some of these elusive bucks. Best of luck to everybody out there. Let me know in the comments down below how your season's going. I can't wait to hear about it. Hopefully things are going to pick up for everyone. I'll see you guys in the next one.